Desalination is a process that removes minerals from saline water. More generally, desalination refers to the removal of salts and minerals from a target substance, as in soil desalination, which is an issue for agriculture. Salt water is desalinated to produce water suitable for human consumption or irrigation. One byproduct of desalination is salt. Desalination is used on many seagoing ships and submarines. Most of the modern interest in desalination is focused on cost-effective provision of fresh water for human use. Along with recycled wastewater, it is one of the few rainfall-independent water sources. Due to its energy consumption, desalinating seawater is generally more costly than fresh water from rivers or groundwater. Water recycling and water conservation. However, these alternatives are not always available, and depletion of reserves is a critical problem worldwide. Currently, approximately 1% of the world's population is dependent on desalinated water to meet daily needs, but the UN expects that 14% of the world's population will encounter water scarcity by 2025. Desalination is particularly relevant in dry countries such as Australia, which traditionally have relied on collecting rainfall behind dams for water. According to the International Desalination Association, in June 2015, 18,426 desalination plants operated worldwide, producing 86.8 million cubic meters per day, providing water for 300 million people. This number increased from 78.4 million cubic meters in 2013, a 57% increase in just 5 years. The single largest desalination project is Ras Al Khair in Saudi Arabia, which produced 1,025,000 cubic meters per day in 2014. Although this plant is expected to be surpassed by a plant in California, Israel produces a higher proportion of its water than any other country, totaling 40% of its water use. Methods. The traditional process used in these operations is vacuum distillation, essentially boiling it to leave impurities behind. In desalination, atmospheric pressure is reduced, thus lowering the required temperature. Liquids boil when the vapor pressure equals the ambient pressure, and vapor pressure increases with temperature. Thus, because of the reduced temperature, low temperature waste heat from electrical power generation or industrial processes can be employed. The principal competing processes use membranes to desalinate, principally applying reverse osmosis. Membrane processes use semi-permeable membranes and pressure to separate salts from water. Reverse osmosis plant membrane systems typically use less energy than thermal distillation. Desalination remains energy-intensive, however, and future costs will continue to depend on the energy prices. Considerations and criticism. Energy consumption. Energy consumption of seawater desalination has reached as low as 3 kWh per cubic meter, including pre-filtering and ancillaries, similar to the energy consumption of other freshwater supplies transported over large distances, but much higher than local freshwater supplies that use 0.2 kWh per cubic meter or less. A minimum energy consumption for seawater desalination of around 1 kWh per cubic meter has been determined, excluding prior filtering and intake outfall pumping. Under 2 kWh per cubic meter has been achieved with reverse osmosis membrane technology, leaving limited scope for further energy reductions. Supplying all U.S. domestic water by desalination would increase energy consumption by around 10%, about the amount of energy used by domestic refrigerators. Domestic consumption is a relatively small fraction of the total water usage. Note: electrical equivalent refers to the amount of electrical energy that could be generated using a given quantity of thermal energy and appropriate turbine generator. These calculations do not include the energy required to construct or refurbish items consumed in the process. Cogeneration. Cogeneration is generating excess heat and electricity generation from a single process. Cogeneration can provide usable heat for desalination in an integrated or dual-purpose facility where a power plant provides the energy for desalination. Alternatively, the facility's energy production may be dedicated to the production of potable water, or excess energy may be produced and incorporated into the energy grid. Cogeneration takes various forms, and theoretically any form of energy production could be used. However, the majority of current and planned cogeneration desalination plants use either fossil fuels and nuclear power as the source of energy. Most plants are located in the Middle East or North Africa, which use the petroleum resources to offset limited water resources. The advantage of dual-purpose facilities is they can be more efficient in energy consumption, thus making desalination more viable. The current trend in dual-purpose facilities is hybrid configurations, in which the permeate from reverse osmosis desalination is mixed with distillate from thermal desalination. Basically, two or more desalination processes are combined along with power production. Such facilities have been implemented in Saudi Arabia at Jeddah and Yanbu. A typical supercarrier in the U.S. military uses nuclear power to desalinate 400,000 U.S. gallons of water per day. Economics. Costs of desalinating seawater are generally higher than fresh water from rivers or groundwater, water recycling, and water conservation, but alternatives are not always available. Desalination costs in 2013 ranged from 45 cents to $1 per cubic meter. More than half of the cost comes directly from energy costs, and since energy prices are very volatile, actual costs can vary substantially. The cost of untreated fresh water in the developing world can reach $5 per cubic meter. Factors that determine the costs for desalination include capacity and type of facility, location, feedwater, labor, energy, financing and concentrate disposal. Desalination stills control pressure, temperature and brine concentrations to optimize efficiency. Nuclear-powered desalination might be economical on a large scale. While noting costs are falling, and generally positive about the technology for affluent areas in proximity to oceans, a 2004 study argued, desalinated water may be a solution for some water stress regions, but not for places that are poor, deep in the interior of a continent, or at high elevation. Unfortunately, that includes some of the places with biggest water problems, and, indeed, one needs to lift the water by 2,000 meters, or transport it over more than 1,600 kilometers to get transport costs equal to the desalination costs. Thus, it may be more economical to transport fresh water from somewhere else than to desalinate it. In places far from the sea, like New Delhi, or in high places, like Mexico City, transport costs could match desalination costs. Desalinated water is also expensive in places that are both somewhat far from the sea and somewhat high, such as Riyadh and Harare. By contrast, in other locations transport costs are much less, such as Beijing, Bangkok, Zaragoza, Phoenix, and, of course, coastal cities like Tripoli. Quote, After desalination at Jubail, Saudi Arabia, water is pumped 200 miles inland to Riyadh. For coastal cities, desalination is increasingly viewed as a competitive choice. In 2014, the Israeli facilities of Hadera, Palmahim, Ashkelon, and Sorek were desalinizing water for less than 40 cents per cubic meter. As of 2006, Singapore was desalinating water for 49 cents per cubic meter. The city of Perth began operating a reverse osmosis seawater desalination plant in 2006. A desalination plant now operates in Sydney, and the Wonthaggi desalination plant was under construction in Wonthaggi, Victoria. The Perth desalination plant is powered partially by renewable energy from the Emu Downs wind farm. A wind farm at Bungendore in New South Wales was purpose-built to generate enough renewable energy to offset the Sydney plant's energy use, mitigating concerns about harmful greenhouse gas emissions. In December 2007, the South Australian government announced it would build a seawater desalination plant for the city of Adelaide, Australia, located at Port Stanvac. The desalination plant was to be funded by raising water rates to achieve full cost recovery. A January 17, 2008 article in the Wall Street Journal stated, in November, Connecticut-based Poseidon Resources Corp. won a key regulatory approval to build the $300 million water desalination plant in Carlsbad, north of San Diego. The facility would produce 50 million US gallons of drinking water per day, enough to supply about 100,000 homes. As of June 2012, the cost for the desalinated water had risen to $2,329 per acre-foot. Each $1,000 per acre-foot works out to $3.06 for 1,000 gallons, or $1.81 per cubic meter. Poseidon Resources made an unsuccessful attempt to construct a desalination plant in Tampa Bay, FL, in 2001. The board of directors of Tampa Bay Water was forced to buy the plant from Poseidon in 2001 to prevent a third failure of the project. Tampa Bay Water faced 5 years of engineering problems and operation at 20% capacity to protect marine life. The facility reached capacity only in 2007. In 2008, A Energy Recovery Inc. was desalinating water for 46 cents per cubic meter. Environmental intake in the United States. Cooling water intake structures are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. These structures can have the same impacts to the environment as desalination facility intakes. According to EPA, water intake structures cause adverse environmental impact by sucking fish and shellfish or their eggs into an industrial system. The organisms may be killed or injured by heat, physical stress, or chemicals. Larger organisms may be killed or injured when they become trapped against screens at the front of an intake structure. Alternative intake types that mitigate these impacts include beach wells, but they require more energy and higher costs. The Kwinana desalination plant opened in Perth in 2007. Water there and at Queensland's Gold Coast desalination plant and Sydney's Kernel desalination plant is withdrawn at 0.1 meters per second, which is slow enough to let fish escape. The plant provides nearly 140,000 cubic meters of clean water per day. Outflow desalination processes produce large quantities of brine, possibly at above ambient temperature, and contain residues of pretreatment and cleaning chemicals, the reaction byproducts and heavy metals due to corrosion. Chemical pretreatment and cleaning are a necessity in most desalination plants, which typically includes prevention of biofouling, scaling, foaming and corrosion in thermal plants, and of biofouling, suspended solids and scale deposits in membrane plants. To limit the environmental impact of returning the brine to the ocean, it can be diluted with another stream of water entering the ocean, such as the outfall of a wastewater treatment power plant, with medium to large power plant and desalination plants. The power plant's cooling water flow is likely to be several times larger than that of the desalination plant, reducing the salinity of the combination. Another method to dilute the brine is to mix it via a diffuser in a mixing zone. For example, once a pipeline containing the brine reaches the seafloor, it can split into many branches, each releasing brine gradually through small holes along its length. Mixing can be combined with power plant or wastewater plant dilution. Brine is denser than seawater and therefore sinks to the ocean bottom and can damage the ecosystem. Careful reintroduction can minimize this problem. Typical ocean conditions allow for rapid dilution, thereby minimizing harm. Alternatives without pollution. Some methods of desalination, particularly in combination with evaporation ponds, solar stills, and condensation trap, do not discharge brine. They do not use chemicals or burn fossil fuels. They do not work with membranes or other critical parts, such as components that include heavy metals, thus do not produce toxic waste. A new approach that works like a solar still, but on the scale of industrial evaporation ponds, is the integrated Biotech system. It can be considered full desalination because it converts the entire amount of saltwater intake into distilled water. One of the advantages of this system is the feasibility for inland operation. Standard advantages also include no air pollution and no temperature increase of endangered natural water bodies from power plant cooling water discharge. Another important advantage is the production of sea salt for industrial and other uses. As of 2015, 50% of the world's sea salt production relies on fossil energy sources. Alternatives to desalination, increased water conservation and efficiency remain the most cost-effective approaches in areas with a large potential to improve the efficiency of water use practices. Wastewater reclamation provides multiple benefits over desalination. Urban runoff and stormwater capture also provide benefits in treating, restoring and recharging groundwater. A proposed alternative to desalination in the American Southwest is the commercial importation of bulk water from water-rich areas, either by oil tankers converted to water carriers, or pipelines. The idea is politically unpopular in Canada, where governments imposed trade barriers to bulk water exports as a result of a North American Free Trade Agreement claim. Public health concerns. Desalination removes iodine from water and could increase the risk of iodine deficiency disorders. Israeli researchers claimed a possible link between seawater desalination and iodine deficiency, finding deficits among euthyroid adults exposed to iodine-poor water concurrently with an increasing proportion of their area's drinking water from seawater reverse osmosis. They later found probable iodine deficiency disorders in a population reliant on desalinated seawater. Experimental techniques. Other desalination techniques include waste heat. Diesel generators commonly provide electricity in remote areas. About 40% to 50% of the energy output is low-grade heat that leaves the engine via the exhaust. Connecting a membrane distillation system to the diesel engine exhaust repurposes this low-grade heat for desalination. The system actively cools the diesel generator, improving its efficiency and increasing its electricity output. This results in an energy-neutral desalination solution. An example plant was commissioned by Dutch company Aquava in March 2014 for Gully, Maldives. Low-temperature thermal originally stemming from ocean thermal energy conversion research. Low-temperature thermal desalination takes advantage of water boiling at low pressure, even at ambient temperature. The system uses pumps to create a low-pressure, low-temperature environment in which water boils at a temperature gradient of 8 to 10 degrees Celsius between two volumes of water. Cool ocean water is supplied from depths of up to 600 meters. This water is pumped through coils to condense the water vapor. The resulting condensate is purified water. LTTD may take advantage of the temperature gradient available at power plants, where large quantities of warm wastewater are discharged from the plant, reducing the energy input needed to create a temperature gradient. Experiments were conducted in the US and Japan to test the approach. In Japan, a spray flash evaporation system was tested by Saga University. In Hawaii, the National Energy Laboratory tested an open-cycle OTEC plant with fresh water and power production using a temperature difference of 20 C between surface water and water at a depth of around 500 meters. LTTD was studied by India's National Institute of Ocean Technology in 2004. The first LTTD plant opened in 2005 at Kavaratti in the Lakshadweep Islands. The plant's capacity is 100,000 L per day, at a capital cost of 50 million Indian rupees. The plant uses deep water at a temperature of 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. In 2007, NIOT opened an experimental, floating LTTD plant off the coast of Chennai, with a capacity of 1 million L per day. A smaller plant was established in 2009 at the North Chennai Thermal Power Station to prove the LTTD application where power plant cooling water is available. Thermionic Process. In October 2009, Saltworks Technologies announced a process that uses solar or other thermal heat to drive an ionic current that removes all sodium and chlorine ions from the water using ion exchange membranes. Evaporation and condensation for crops. The seawater greenhouse uses natural evaporation and condensation processes inside a greenhouse powered by solar energy to grow crops into arid, coastal land. Other approaches for wood osmosis. One process was commercialized by Modern Water plc using forward osmosis, with a number of plants reported to be in operation. Small-scale solar. The United States, France and the United Arab Emirates are working to develop practical solar desalination. Aquadania's water distiller has been installed at Dahab, Egypt, and in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. In this approach, a solar thermal collector measuring 2 square meters can distill from 40 to 60 liters per day from any local water source, 5 times more than conventional stills. It eliminates the need for plastic PET bottles or energy-consuming water transport. In Central California, a startup company, WaterFX, is developing a solar-powered method of desalination that can enable the use of local water, including runoff water that can be treated and used again. Salty groundwater in the region would be treated to become fresh water, and in areas near the ocean, seawater could be treated. Passerelle. The Passerelle process uses reduced atmospheric pressure rather than heat to drive evaporative desalination. The pure water vapor generated by distillation is then compressed and condensed using an advanced compressor. The compression process improves distillation efficiency by creating the reduced pressure in the evaporation chamber. The compressor centrifuges the pure water vapor after it is drawn through a demister, causing it to compress against tubes in the collection chamber. The compression of the vapor increases its temperature. The heat is transferred to the input water falling in the tubes, vaporizing the water in the tubes. Water vapor condenses on the outside of the tubes as product water. By combining several physical processes, Chiral enables most of the system's energy to be recycled through its evaporation, demisting, vapor compression, condensation, and water movement processes. Geothermal energy can drive desalination. In most locations, geothermal desalination beats using scarce groundwater or surface water, environmentally and economically. Nano technology. Nanotube membranes may prove to be effective for water filtration and desalination processes that would require substantially less energy than reverse osmosis. Hermetic, sulfonated nanocomposite membranes have shown to be capable of reducing almost all forms of contamination to the parts per billion level. These nanomaterials, using a non-reverse osmosis process, have little or no susceptibility to high salt concentration levels. Biomimesis. Biomimetic membranes are another approach. Electrochemical. In 2008, Siemens Water Technologies announced technology that applied electric fields to desalinate 1 cubic meter of water while using only a purported 1.5 kilowatt-hours of energy. If accurate, this process would consume 1/2 the energy of other processes. As of 2012, a demonstration plant was operating in Singapore. Researchers at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Marburg are developing more efficient methods of electrochemically mediated seawater desalination. Freeze-Thaw. Freeze-Thaw desalination uses freezing to remove fresh water from frozen seawater. Electrokinetic shocks. Membraneless desalination at ambient temperature and pressure used electrokinetic shocks. Waves. Anions and cations in salt water are exchanged for carbonate anions and calcium cations respectively using electrokinetic shock waves. Calcium and carbonate ions react to form calcium carbonate, which precipitates, leaving fresh water. Theoretical energy efficiency of this method is on par with electrodialysis and reverse osmosis facilities. Estimates vary widely between 15,000 - 20,000 desalination plants producing more than 20,000 meters 3 per day. Micro-desalination plants operate near almost every natural gas fracking facility as found in the United States. In nature, evaporation of water over the oceans in the water cycle is a natural desalination process. The formation of sea ice produces ice with little salt much lower than in seawater. Seabirds distill seawater using countercurrent exchange in a gland with a rete mirabile. The gland secretes highly concentrated brine stored near the nostrils above the beak. The bird then sneezes the brine out. As fresh water is not usually available in their environments, some seabirds, such as pelicans, petrels, albatrosses, gulls and terns, possess this gland, which allows them to drink the salty water from their environments while they are far from land. Mangrove trees grow in seawater. They secrete salt by trapping it in parts of the root, which are then eaten by animals. Additional salt is removed by storing it in leaves that fall off. Some types of mangroves have glands on the leaves, which work in a similar way to the seabird desalination gland. Salt is extracted to the leaf exterior as small crystals, which then fall off the leaf. Willow trees and reeds absorb salt and other contaminants, effectively desalinating the water. This is used in artificial constructed wetlands for treating sewage.